Hi, I'm Odalyn. At my brother's promotion dinner, my father raised his glass and called me a failure. Seconds later, his boss stood up and saluted me. They called it a mistake. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they didn't just overlook me, they erased me. On purpose. And now? They want to pretend none of it happened. But you don't get to rewrite someone you buried, not without consequences. Before we dive in, what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been treated like a ghost in your own family? The roads back into Helena were slick with black ice, the kind that made old folks whisper warnings like prayers. I hadn't driven them in 5 years, but my hands still remembered every bend. My GPS was silent. I didn't need it. You don't forget the way home, even if you tried your damnedest. In the trunk of my rental sat my uniform, perfectly pressed, every medal pinned in place. I didn't wear it. I wasn't here to impress anyone. Tonight wasn't about me. It never was. I pulled into the parking lot of the Blue Crest Country Club at 5:57 p.m., sharp. Of course, I wasn't expected on time. I wasn't expected at all. But Cassian's promotion party was in full swing inside that private dining hall, and my RSVP, as always, had been conveniently misplaced. This time, though, I showed up anyway. When I walked in, the air reeked of wine, cologne, and old money. My mother turned just enough to flash me that tight, rehearsed smile she reserved for people she tolerated. Her eyes flicked to my jeans, then back to my face, and without a word, she gestured toward the end of the table. That's where O. Holt, guest, was printed in small letters on a tag, next to the busing station. Everyone else had full names, titles, even companies. VP of Procurement. CEO, Holt Logistics. Director of Marketing. I sat down and folded the place card in half. No one stood to greet me. Cassian was surrounded, of course. His hair was gelled back like a TV anchor, that faux humble smirk plastered on while middle-aged execs clapped him on the back. I could barely hear Wren when she leaned in from 2 seats over. "Didn't they know you were coming?" "They did," I said, sipping water from a sweating glass. It was strange, the way absence reshapes a family. When you're gone long enough, people feel entitled to rewrite your role. In their version, I had left. They never said I'd been deployed. They never told people I was serving. Instead, they spun it like I'd abandoned them, walked out on the family business. But that's what Cassian did when he got that DUI and Dad still gave him a second chance. Dinner moved in fits and starts. The steak was cold in the center, but no one noticed. Everyone was too busy waiting for the toast. And then Harlan stood. My father always did have the voice of a preacher, deep, performative, full of authority whether he deserved it or not. He clinked his knife on his glass. Silence followed. "To Cassian," he boomed, "the son who stepped up, the one who's never run from duty, the one who made this family proud." Laughter erupted. Forks clinked. Wine glasses lifted. Someone whistled. My hand tightened on the stem of my glass. Wren's smile dropped. She glanced at me, her brow furrowed. I didn't flinch. I'd been trained not to. You don't react in front of your enemy, or your father. Then came the sound of the door opening. Every head turned. A tall man in uniform stepped in, his eyes locked on mine, and his body went stiff like a fresh recruit. "Colonel," he said, snapping into a salute. The room froze. Someone's fork hit the floor. The only sound was the HVAC humming above us. Cassian choked mid-sip. Wine sprayed across his plate. My father didn't move, but his face drained of color like a man who'd just seen his own obituary. I stood slowly, with purpose, not drama. I nodded to the man in the doorway. "Good evening," I said. He stammered. We didn't know you'd be joining us, Colonel Holt." I turned to face the entire table. Neither did they. Nobody laughed this time. I could feel the weight of 100 unspoken things hanging in the air like fog. Regret, embarrassment, fear. But not one of them said a damn word. So I turned, walked away, let my heels echo across that polished floor like a gavel. Outside the doors the air hit colder, but I welcomed it. It was honest. The cold air outside wrapped around me like a blanket that knew my name. It bit at my cheeks, but at least it was honest. The kind of honest you don't get from a father who toasts your brother's name while erasing yours. I walked across the gravel driveway under a pale moon, my boots crunching with every step. I didn't bother saying goodbye. I had already done enough of that in this family. The house was still, silent in the way that only old homes can be, where memory lingers louder than voices. I let myself in with the spare key I knew they still kept beneath the third brick on the front step, the same one Dad told Cassian never to touch, but never told me why. Upstairs, my childhood bedroom looked exactly like I'd left it. Not the day I moved out for basic, but the day I graduated high school. Posters of colleges I didn't attend, a dusty collection of cheerleading trophies, the same comforter I picked out at 16. It was like walking into a museum curated by someone desperate to remember who I was before I chose a life they couldn't control. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. Not a single trace of my military service, no photo in uniform, no mention of West Point, nothing. You'd think I died at 18. My hand drifted toward the bookshelf, fingers grazing the spines of forgotten novels and yearbooks until they paused at a small silver frame tucked behind a stack of dog-eared paperbacks. A photo of Cassian and Dad on a fishing trip. They were laughing, sun in their eyes, pride written all over their faces. I was there that day. I took that picture. But in the frame, I wasn't there. They'd cropped me out. It hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't invisible to them. I was disposable. A wave of memory crashed in. I was 19, sitting across from General Eleanor at a diner near base. She wore civilian clothes, hair pulled back, lipstick sharp. She never raised her voice, didn't need to. Authority radiated off her like heat from a stovetop. She handed me the ROTC paperwork without blinking. "Your family won't like this," she said, sliding a pen across the table. "That's how you'll know it's worth doing." I hesitated. She didn't. "Keep going," she said, "even when they pretend you don't exist." In the present, I reached for my duffel and unzipped the side pouch. The small pin she'd given me, silver eagle wings on a blue backing, was still there, tucked into a folded sock like it had been waiting. My fingers closed around it like it was a lifeline. I needed somewhere to put my uniform. I didn't want it folded in the trunk anymore. Opening the bottom drawer of my old dresser, I pushed aside layers of old t-shirts and theater programs. But something odd caught my eye. A printed email, creased and yellowing at the corners, like someone had meant to hide it but hadn't cared enough to destroy it. I sat on the floor, the light from the hallway casting a soft glow as I read. It was a thread. My father had written to a man named Brandon Willis from Pinnacle Systems 3 years ago. Subject, Ree Holt, internal recognition document. Dad's message was short, efficient. To avoid any confusion between the siblings, I request that only Cassian Holt's name be included in formal project documentation. Audlin Holt's contribution, while valued, can remain internal. It's best we don't distract from the leadership narrative. My breath caught. My name wasn't just forgotten, it was erased. Deliberately, professionally, like I was a liability to the story he wanted to sell. I whispered into the stillness, "He buried me." A knock at the door. It creaked open a few inches and Wren's face appeared. Her voice was low. "They're saying you tried to upstage him, Cassian. He's telling people it was all a stunt, that you timed it." I didn't speak. I just held up the paper. She stepped in fully, took it from my hand, read fast. Her lips moved silently, and then they stopped. Her fingers tightened on the page. "You're not just on the project," she said slowly, eyes darting to mine. "You're above them." The house hadn't creaked once, all night. Not under my steps, not when I turned the doorknob to leave. It was as if it, too, wanted me gone quietly. By 7:15 a.m., I was on the road, sun just breaking through thin gray clouds over Helena. My uniform was crisp, pressed the night before, and the keep going pin sat firmly behind my lapel, like armor only I could feel. I didn't look back at the house when I pulled out of the driveway. Some ghosts don't deserve a wave goodbye. The Pinnacle Defense Systems regional headquarters sat like a steel and glass fortress at the edge of town. The reserved military liaison space was still there, marked with weather-faded paint. I pulled in, cut the engine, and exhaled. I adjusted my collar, stepped out, boots firm against the sidewalk. As I walked toward the main doors, a few employees in casual slacks and weekend polos glanced up. One of them froze mid-conversation. Another lowered their coffee cup. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. Let the uniform explain it all. Inside, the front desk attendant stood so fast her chair bumped the wall. "Ma'am, Colonel, we weren't told you were arriving in person today." "I know," I said, offering a polite nod. "Is the 10th floor already in session?" Yes. Please, let me scan you up." By the time I stepped into the elevator, the whispers had already begun. Behind me, someone muttered, "She's a Holt?" Another, "But she's Cassian's sister?" A young assistant stepped in just before the doors closed, maybe early 20s, barely hiding the shake in her hand as she clutched a leather portfolio. She looked at me like I was a myth. I thought you'd be joining over Zoom," she said softly. "Nobody knew you were family." "Sometimes it's better to remind them," I said. The doors opened with a soft ding. The 10th floor boardroom came into view immediately, glass-walled, modern, and already filled. I walked in without announcement. My father's voice was mid-sentence when he saw me. His posture froze, lips still parted. Cassian, seated beside him, went pale. 2 department leads looked between them and me, caught mid-nod. I gave a formal salute to the room. "Good morning. Are we proceeding with the morning briefing?" Nobody answered, so I walked calmly to an empty seat at the head of the table, one that was technically mine. No one moved, then the door behind me swung open. "Colonel Holt?" A woman's voice rang out, brisk but not unkind. I turned. Ginevra Maddox, CEO of Pinnacle, stood in a tailored navy suit, holding a tablet under one arm. She blinked at me, surprised, then smiled. "In person this time," I said smoothly. "I thought it was important." She stepped in, nodding. "Absolutely. Everyone. This is our liaison from the Pentagon. She has full strategic authority over Project Aegis." That landed like a stone dropped in a still lake. Ripples everywhere. Harlan's jaw moved slightly, like trying to chew something he couldn't swallow. Cassian didn't blink. His fingers curled around the edge of his laptop. I didn't look at either of them. Instead, I opened my folder and addressed the systems engineer across the table. "Let's begin with the encryption spec updates," I said. "I want to confirm version alignment across all platforms." The man stammered but complied. I nodded, listening intently. They weren't expecting a real briefing. They'd expected a symbol, maybe even a scolding. But I was here to work, and that rattled them more. Cassian tried to speak halfway through the update. "I have a revised interface plan I'd like to present, building on our last iteration." I turned to him gently. "You're referencing protocols we sunsetted last quarter. That model's deprecated. I'll circulate the current specs this afternoon." His lips parted, then pressed together tight. Ginevra, meanwhile, was nodding enthusiastically. "Exactly the clarity this project needs," she said. "Colonel, I'd like you to brief the security leads directly next week." "Gladly," I said, still not looking at my father. For the rest of the session, I directed questions, took notes, and moved through the agenda like I had a dozen times before in war rooms 10 times more stressful than this one. But in the pauses, in the silence between updates and project notes, I felt the air shift. Cassian was unraveling, and for once I didn't reach to catch him. I didn't linger after the meeting. The room emptied slowly, but I was the first one out. I nodded once at Ginevra before slipping into the hallway, the tap of my boots steady, deliberate. No shaking hands, no flushed face. My silence wasn't stillness. It was survival. The hallway lights buzzed above. Somewhere down the corridor, a copier clattered like it was trying to fill the space no one dared speak into. I stepped into the break area and let the noise fade behind me. A junior staffer, a young woman with a badge that read, "Taylor, intern," approached, hesitant. She held out a coffee cup, her hand trembling slightly. "Ma'am, would you like something hot?" Her kindness caught me off guard. I managed a soft smile and accepted it with a nod. "Thank you. That's very thoughtful." She looked like she wanted to say something else, maybe ask something, but she just nodded and stepped away. I leaned against the counter, gripping the cup. My throat was dry, but I wasn't thirsty. I was holding the heat like it might convince my body to feel something other than restraint. "Really?" a voice hissed behind me. I turned slightly. Cassian stood near the vending machines, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. His face was still pale, but his eyes burned. "You just had to do it in front of everyone?" I didn't answer. I took another sip of the coffee, staring past him at the cheap snack display. "You humiliated me," he muttered. "You really think you're better now, just because you waltzed in here in uniform?" I still said nothing. He took a step closer. "Still trying to prove you matter, Colonel?" I turned to walk away. His arm shifted slightly, not touching, but close enough to signal he'd block my path if I tried to leave. "You're not better than me, Odie. You're just a dressed-up bureaucrat." Slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed folder. I held it for a beat, then pressed it flat against his chest. "What's this?" he muttered, snatching it and cracking it open. His face shifted immediately. "That's the systems compliance log you were supposed to submit 6 months ago," I said. "The one that never made it to DC?" He skimmed the top page. I could see his pulse ticking at his neck. "Half the entries are outdated," I continued. "Most were never approved for final integration, and you've been pushing these into production under my clearance level." He looked up, lips parted. "You knew whose name was on the documentation. You just hoped no one else would look. Erasing me made it easier to steal from me. Dad told me to fast-track," he started. I cut him off, quiet, firm. "You lied to everyone about me," I said. "But what terrifies you now is that I didn't lie about you." Cassian blinked. His mouth opened again, but no sound came. For a brief moment, I saw us in reverse, back in our living room, years ago. The fireplace crackling, me at 17, holding the ROTC letter, my father gripping the edges of it like it was filth. "We don't need soldiers in this family," he'd said coldly. "We build things here, real things, not wars." Back then, I had believed him. I thought walking away would keep the peace. I thought silence was loyalty. Now, in the reflection of the break room's glass door, I saw something else. Not the disappointment, not the forgotten daughter. I saw a woman they could no longer ignore. Cassian was still frozen when I stepped around him. As I walked down the hallway, I caught movement at the far end. Ginevra Maddox stood near the conference wing entrance, tablet in hand. She'd seen enough, maybe more than I realized. She didn't speak. She simply nodded once, slowly. A different kind of nod, one of recognition. I kept moving. Then, his voice cut through the corridor. "Odalyn, we need to talk, now." I stopped mid-step. For a breath, I didn't turn. I let the tension stretch, let it throb in the air. Then slowly, I pivoted to face him. The hallway stretched out ahead of me, but my focus narrowed the second I caught up with him. Harlan didn't speak as we walked. He didn't have to. His pace was rigid, the way a man moves when he thinks control is slipping through his fingers. His shoes struck the polished tile harder than necessary, echoing louder than either of us liked. He reached his corner office, swiped his badge, and pushed the door open. I stepped in behind him and heard it click shut like a cell door. He didn't offer me a seat, but he gestured toward one with the stiffness of habit, as if muscle memory might pass for courtesy. "I'll stand," I said. He moved behind the desk and sat, his fingers folded tightly, knuckles whitening. "If this was about proving a point," he began, sarcasm already sharpening his tone, "then congratulations, you've made it loud and clear." "This wasn't about making a point," I replied calmly. "It was about executing my responsibilities, which, if you read your chain of command flowchart, now include oversight of your division." He scoffed. "You embarrassed this family. You marched in here like a war hero and turned a routine review into a spectacle." "No," I said, eyes steady. "You made me invisible. All I did was show up." He opened a drawer and pulled out a file I knew wouldn't matter. "You think this uniform gives you the right to rewrite how this family works?" I pulled a printout from my own folder and placed it on the edge of his desk. "I'm not rewriting anything. You already did that." He glanced at it and went still. The email. The one from 3 years ago. The request to scrub my name from all project briefings to avoid confusion between siblings. His voice was quieter when he answered. That was administrative. Cassian was the forward-facing lead. It was easier. "It was deliberate," I corrected. "I wasn't an oversight. I was an inconvenience." He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back and sighed like he was the one carrying the weight. "You never belonged in defense, Odalin. You were always too emotional." My jaw clenched. "You mean I cared too much to cut corners?" He opened his mouth, but the door burst open before he could fire back. Cassian stepped in without knocking. "Are we done with the lecture, or should I leave you two to rehash 20 years of bad blood?" I didn't turn to him. "You plagiarized protocols, ones that could compromise secure systems. That's not family business. That's federal liability." Cassian stepped forward, arms crossed. "You act like you've never cut corners." "No," I said, turning now. "I've patched the ones you created, while you were too busy decorating slideshows to read the threat models." A knock at the door cut the tension, if only for a second. One of Ginevra's aides entered and held out a sealed envelope. "Colonel Holt, legal review approved your red lines. You're clear to submit final compliance updates." "Thank you," I said, and took it without looking away from either of them. The room was full, but I'd never felt more alone. Their voices rose, arguing about authority, legacy, pride. But I wasn't really in the room anymore. My mind drifted back to a humid spring day at Fort Jackson. I was 22. It was my commissioning ceremony. Rows of folding chairs, rows of crisp uniforms, rows of empty seats where my parents said they'd be. I'd saved the middle two, left them unclaimed, and I'd stood there anyway, chin up, chest steady, alone. Now, decades later, I stood again. Same posture, different battlefield. And still, no one in the seats that should have mattered. I blinked. My breathing was shallow. I barely noticed my hand drifting toward my wrist. The watch General Eleanor gave me was gone. I'd left it in the hotel room, forgotten in the rush. Or maybe not forgotten. Maybe I just couldn't bear to wear it here. "I need air," I muttered. They didn't stop me as I left. Maybe they thought I was retreating. Maybe they still believed silence was surrender. I walked fast down the corridor, but the adrenaline wore off too soon. By the time I reached the stairwell, my legs felt like I was dragging weights behind me. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message lit the screen. "Ren, they're planning something. You need to be careful." I stared at it for a long second, and just like that, I knew it wasn't over. It was about to get worse. I didn't go straight back to my hotel. I walked the block twice first. No coat, no umbrella, just the weight of the day pressing deeper into my spine. Helena was quiet on Saturday nights, but my head was anything but. My father's voice still rang inside it, low and cutting. Cassian's arrogance sat in my chest like a stone. When I finally stepped into the lobby, the warm air didn't offer comfort. It only reminded me how cold I'd grown on the inside. The elevator was slow. Inside, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall, hair pinned neatly, shoulders squared, face impassive. But my eyes, they looked like they'd been crying, even though I hadn't shed a single tear. Not yet. Back in my room, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the doorway, staring at the uniform jacket draped over the armchair. Still perfect. Still untouched since morning. I used to feel strength when I wore it. Now, I wasn't sure who it belonged to anymore. I sat down at the edge of the bed, elbows on my knees, letting the silence fill every corner. My phone buzzed against the nightstand. I thought about ignoring it. Then I saw the name, Ren. One new message. "HR won't speak to me directly, but someone left this on my desk. Thought you should hear it." Attached was an audio file, just under 30 seconds long. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the play icon. Then I tapped it. A pause, then static, then Cassian's voice, clear as if he were in the room. I rewrote the code from her schema. She won't say anything, she's too proud. Dad made sure of that. My fingers tightened around the phone. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room tilted, or maybe I did. I stood, walked to the window, cracked it open. Cold air hit my face like a slap. They hadn't just underestimated me, they'd built their entire foundation on it. He said it with confidence, like a man who had spent his life not facing consequences, because he knew I wouldn't bring them. Until now. I dropped the phone onto the desk and pulled out my laptop. The Pentagon liaison system flickered to life, casting a pale blue across the room. I didn't log a report. Not yet. I wasn't aiming to detonate. Not while I still had aim left. Instead, I accessed the system's logs. Every protocol, every timestamp, every schema submission and review cycle that passed through my desk. I had receipts. I'd always had them. Just never the will to use them. Until now. It took 20 minutes to compile the files. I labeled them methodically, attached the relevant threads, compressed the audio, scrubbed metadata. Then I logged into Pinnacle's ethics portal, not as Colonel Holt, as anonymous contract engineer. I uploaded the folder and wrote a single line. If this reaches legal before it reaches the media, you'll preserve more than a contract. You'll preserve integrity. I clicked submit. Silence followed, heavy but different this time, not helpless, intentional. I closed the laptop and rested my forehead against the cool edge of the desk. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't proud either. I was tired, the kind of tired that comes from fighting battles no one knows you're in, the kind that doesn't show up in your voice or your posture, but in the quiet spaces between your words. I stood up and walked over to my duffel, unzipped the side pocket. The watch was still there, General Eleanor's watch, the one I hadn't worn since my first deployment. The leather strap was cracked, the metal face scratched from years of wear, but the engraving on the back was still clear, still you. I buckled it onto my wrist, and just then, like timing only the universe could coordinate, my laptop dinged. Internal review request, formal inquiry initiated. A breath escaped my lungs. Not relief exactly, more like acknowledgement. They had no idea. I arrived just after sunrise. The light in Helena had a sharp winter clarity to it, cold but honest, the kind that didn't allow shadows to hide where they didn't belong. My shoes echoed through the marble lobby as I passed security. They didn't stop me. No clipboard sign-in, no badge printed, just a quiet nod from a senior officer who, 2 days ago, barely made eye contact. Funny how fast reverence settles when the wind shifts. Upstairs, the conference room had already been prepared. No coffee or croissants this time, just folders, water pitchers, and tension. I stepped inside. Ginevra sat at the head of the table, her eyes steady. Legal reps flanked her. 2 compliance officers, 1 internal security lead, and an IT specialist were quietly arranging files. My father stood near the windows, arms crossed tight. Cassian, pale and fidgeting, stared down at a notepad he wasn't writing on. I didn't bring a briefcase. I didn't need one. The flash drive sat inside my jacket, right pocket, above the insignia they'd once told me I'd never earn. Ginevra cleared her throat. Before we begin the standard review, there's been a development. Due to a formal anonymous submission, this session will also serve as the preliminary review for an internal ethics inquiry. Silence. She didn't wait. The submission alleges unauthorized replication of classified encryption protocols, misattribution of authorship, and intentional suppression of credit. Included were access logs, internal communications, and audio recordings. Cassian's grip tightened on his pen until it snapped. Plastic cracked between his fingers. Harlan's lips didn't move, but his jaw locked, the vein in his temple pulsing. Ginevra opened a laptop and turned it toward the table. A soft chime, then playback. Cassian's voice recorded, "I rewrote the code from her schema. She won't say anything, she's too proud. Dad made sure of that. The room went ice cold. Cassian stood abruptly. This is being taken out of context. Ginevra held up a hand. No one is being charged. Yet. This is a review. We are here to examine the facts. Another screen lit up. Side-by-side logs, my schema timestamps, Cassian's modifications. The metadata didn't lie. Ginevra turned her head. Colonel Holt, as Pentagon liaison, do you wish to make a statement? I stood, removed the flash drive, and walked to the head of the table. I didn't look at anyone except her. This contains the original schematics, voice recordings, and DoD audit trails. I recommend immediate third-party forensic review, followed by submission to the Inspector General's office if the findings hold. I placed it gently next to her. Cassian opened his mouth again, but I beat him to it. You knew exactly what you were doing, Cassian. You didn't make a mistake. You gambled that I'd keep swallowing it, like I always have. He pointed. You think this makes you better? You think this power trip is justice? I tilted my head. Integrity isn't a power trip, it's a choice, one you failed to make. Harlan stepped forward, his voice low but sharp. Odalyn, this could ruin the family. I finally turned to him. No, you did that when you decided one child's visibility mattered more than the other's contribution. For a moment, no one spoke. The walls felt like they leaned in closer. From the hallway beyond the glass, I spotted Wren. She didn't wave, just stood there, phone in hand. A second later, my screen buzzed. Wren, you just did what every ignored daughter wishes she could. You didn't yell. You proved. When the meeting ended, everyone filed out quietly. Cassian didn't even look at me. Harlan lingered for a breath too long, then followed. Ginevra remained seated. As I turned to leave, she said softly, Colonel Holt, stay behind. There's something you deserve to know. I paused. Something in her tone had changed. Not command, not concern, truth. Ginevra didn't speak right away. She closed the lounge door softly behind us and stepped out of her heels like she was shedding a second skin. In silence, she crossed to the cabinet and poured tea into 2 porcelain cups, hers slightly overfilled, mine measured to the rim. The quiet wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. I knew your name the moment you walked in, she said gently, setting my cup on the side table. Eleanor Grant talked about you more than she ever talked about herself. Still you, that was her phrase for you. I looked up. She used to say you had this quiet burn, the kind that doesn't flare up for applause, just stays lit until the job's done. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She didn't just recommend you for the liaison role, Ginevra continued. She insisted, told the board you were the only one who wouldn't use the assignment for revenge, said if they ever tried to bury you, you'd grow through the dirt. The tea tasted bitter, or maybe that was just me. There was a knock. Not urgent, but not casual either. The door opened before Ginevra could answer. My father stepped in. Not a word of greeting. Just a man with too much to say and no strength left to carry it. He looked older in this light, smaller. He reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased, worn. Your mother found this last week. I wrote it. Never sent it. He placed it on the table, then stepped back like it might explode. I unfolded it slowly. It was a letter of recommendation. For me. Dated the spring I'd told them I was joining ROTC. The ink had faded along the edges, but the words were clear. Praise for my drive, my discipline, my sense of responsibility. A line that stopped my breath cold. She leads from the front, even when no one's watching. I stared at the signature. Harlan Holt. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I had no idea if he ever meant to send it, or if writing it had been a performance for himself. I folded it again, placed it back in front of him. That girl you wrote about? I said, voice steady. You trained her to disappear. He swallowed, looked away. Cassian's voice echoed from the hallway. You always needed everything to be about you. I didn't flinch. He appeared in the doorway, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. It wasn't enough to win. You had to torch everything around you. I raised one hand, just a quiet motion, and he stopped talking. I turned to Ginevra instead. You once said integrity is a mirror. Mine's been cracked, but it's still whole, and I've learned how to see through the broken pieces. Ginevra nodded once, and in that nod was every truth my family had never spoken aloud. Outside, the sun had begun to dip behind the hills. Shadows crawled across the courtyard as I stepped out with my coat folded over one arm. Near the elevators, I spotted the young assistant, the one who'd brought me coffee that first day. She was walking fast, head down, trying not to be seen. I caught up with her. "Hey," I said softly. She turned, startled. "Colonel Holt." I reached into my coat pocket and took out the silver watch. "This belonged to someone who believed in me before I did," I told her. "I think she'd want someone like you to have it." Her hands trembled as she took it. She tried to thank me, but I just smiled, nodded, and kept walking. That evening, after I'd changed out of my uniform and driven across town, I stood in front of a red brick house I hadn't walked up to in nearly 4 years. The porch light was on. I knocked once. My mother opened the door. She looked surprised but not shocked, as if, somewhere in her bones, she knew I'd come back when I was ready. Behind her, silence. But I spoke first. "I'm not here for a fight," I said calmly. "I'm here to rewrite the ending." The room smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood polish, familiar but distant, like a song I once knew all the words to. I took my seat at the head of the dining table, not because I claimed it, but because it was left open. No one said a word for the first few minutes. The silverware clinked softly. My mother passed the breadbasket to Cassian, who passed it to me without looking up. The steam from the roasted chicken curled upward like it didn't want to settle either. Then my father cleared his throat. "I watched your debrief," he said quietly. "The one on the Joint Ethics Panel site. You were commanding." I met his eyes but didn't reply. Cassian reached for the pitcher and filled my water glass. His hand trembled enough for a few drops to spill onto the tablecloth. He wiped them quickly with his sleeve. Across from me, my mother set down a small plate, a slice of pecan pie. "You used to ask for this on your birthday," she said, trying to smile. I looked at it for a moment. "You used to say birthdays were for looking ahead, not back." She blinked, then looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding band. Out in the living room, something new caught my eye. Framed on the mantel, next to an old wedding photo and a school picture of Cassian, was a black-rimmed document, the Pentagon's official commendation for Project Aegis. My name was in bold, clean, unmistakable. I stood and walked over. "Did you put that up?" I asked without turning. My mother's voice came behind me, softer this time. "I did." "No more hiding?" She took a step closer. "I'm tired of not knowing you." I didn't answer, but I didn't move away either. Later that evening, after the dishes were washed and the table wiped down, I stepped out onto the porch. The Missouri air was warm with spring, and the sound of cicadas had already begun to stir. I pulled my phone from my pocket just as it buzzed. Ginevra. "Colonel Holt," she greeted, then quickly added, "Sorry, Odalin. You're officially on the shortlist for DC rotation. We'll need your decision by the end of next week." I let the words settle. They didn't jolt me the way they might have a month ago. "I'm ready," I said slowly, "but I'd like 1 week." "To do what?" Ginevra asked. I looked across the street. A group of kids were riding their bikes in lopsided loops, laughing without needing a reason. "To feel what it's like to come home and not disappear." There was a pause on the line. "You've earned that." I ended the call and slipped my phone into my jacket. The next day, I mailed the old watch, the one Eleanor Grant gave me, with a handwritten note. I addressed it to her niece in Arlington. It read, "This helped me remember who I was. Pass it forward when she's ready." A week passed. Then, On my first Monday back at the Pentagon, as I stood by the office window overlooking the Potomac, a small brown envelope was delivered to my desk. Inside was a photo. It was me, years ago at ROTC. I was mid-salute, eyes narrowed against the sun, but there was a small, unmistakable smile on my face. Someone had taken it without me knowing. On the back was a sticky note in familiar handwriting. Still you. I held it for a long moment, letting its weight settle into something that didn't crush, but anchored. In the quiet of my office, I spoke aloud, not to anyone in particular, just to the part of myself that once thought she had to earn love by disappearing. They told me I'd never be more than a shadow behind my brother, but shadows shift when the sun rises, and I didn't just rise, I led. I placed the photo beside my desk phone and straightened the edges, and I'll keep leading. To anyone who's ever been told they were too much, or not enough, or never quite right by the people who should have loved them first, know this: you are enough. And sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one that ends up carrying the most weight. Have you ever had your worth questioned by your own family? How did you reclaim your voice? Tell me your story. I read every comment.